India, through its ancient history, has seen many kings and empires come and go. Many came and many went, but only few managed to change the course of Indian history and shape it in the way we know today. Among them, the Chola Empire reigned supreme. The Cholas ruled for more than 1500 years, making them one of the longest ruling families in human history, if not the longest. Unfortunately today, despite its immense contributions, it has all but forgotten from public memory. As the saying goes, history is written by the victors. Chola history was conveniently forgotten, with not even a memorial for its great kings. This episode is an attempt to shed some light on one of the greatest empires ever to have ruled India. River Kaveri is one of the most sacred rivers in southern India, flowing from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu, and is the third largest river after Krishna and Godavari in the south. The Chola Empire was established in the fertile delta basin of Kaveri River. At the time, the Cholas were engaged in constant battles with other two kingdoms of the region, the Pandyas and the Cheras. The control of fertile lands of Kaveri was what kept them engaged. The Cholas reigned supreme until the very end. At its peak, the Chola Empire controlled not only southern India and Sri Lanka, but also the Maldives, with influence reaching much of Southeast Asia, including today's Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and even had diplomatic and trading relationships with China's Song dynasty from 960 to 1279 CE. The Chola kingdom left a lasting impact on almost all major facets of modern-day India, and especially southern India, right from music, architecture, literature, and even political influence. Some of the most famous and imposing architectural marvels of South are largely attributed to this kingdom, including the iconic Brihadeshwara Temple of Tanjore. Brihadeshwara Temple was built between 1003 to 1010 AD by Chola king Rajaraja. Today, this temple is part of UNESCO World Heritage Site. We will take a look at the great Chola kings, its military conquests, as well as its immense cultural contributions. Historians divide the 1500-year Chola Empire into three distinct timelines for better understanding of individual era and relevancy to the times. They are the early Chola, the medieval, and the later Cholas. The medieval Cholas are considered the most important, and also the golden phase of Chola Empire's entire history. The early Chola period is believed to be between 300 BC to 300 CE. This is an interesting period of history as it coincides with the mighty Mauryan Empire ruled by Emperor Ashoka the Great in the north. As records from so far back are hard to come by, very little is known of this phase of Chola Empire, but one thing is clear, they were respected and feared at the same time. Mauryan Empire, under Emperor Ashoka, had authorized construction of pillars across the entire length and breadth of their empire, famously called the Pillars of Ashoka. Inscriptions written on these pillars are considered important and accurate proof of life and times of this era. The Cholas have been referenced in these pillars as one of the kingdoms with which Ashoka Empire had friendly relationships with. The Cholas had established trading relationships with Europe, and this has been mentioned by several European travelers. Two of the main ones being Periplus of Erythraean Sea, which talks about maritime trade links Roman Empire had with various kingdoms of the time, including the Chola Empire, and another one written by geographer, historian, and astronomer Claudius Ptolemy, who wrote about Chola kingdom in much detail. The greatest king of early Chola phase is Karikalan Chola. He ruled around 90 CE and was known to be a fierce warrior and an able administrator. He defeated the other two prominent powers of the time, that is the Pandyas and the Cheras, to establish a single rule across the whole region. One of the hallmarks of Chola kings has been the stress on ensuring stability and prosperity in their regions. He is credited with the construction of flood bank called the Grand Anicut to manage the flow of river and control flooding. This flood bank continues to exist even today at the same location. It is one of the earliest known civil construction works in India. Moving on to the next phase called the medieval Chola period. This period ranging from 848 to 1070 CE is considered the golden era of Chola kingdom. Almost everything we attribute today to Cholas is attributed to this phase of their history. During this time, they transformed themselves from being just another kingdom in southern India to a force to reckon with, not just in India but across Asia. A mark of a great empire is how everything is built on grand scale and how strong the military is. On the military front, Cholas built a strong army and blue water navy employing over 1,000,000 men in their force, which enabled them to achieve the military, political and cultural influence over a vast maritime empire stretching from the Maldives to the Philippines and to the northern part of India, and trade links that stretched from Rome to China. On the cultural front, they built signature Chola temples that stand to this day and focused on the growth of Tamil arts and literature. The Chola naval influence resulted in the lasting legacy of Indic cultural influence on language, art, architecture, and religion across Southeast Asia. In 858 CE, Vijayalaya Chola captured Tanjore and re-established Chola as a force to reckon with in the region. He is considered the founder of the medieval Chola dynasty, and like his predecessors, was known as a fierce warrior. At the time, the two powerful dynasties, Pallavas and Pandyas, were engaged in war. Vijayalaya seized this opportunity to capture Tanjore. This win and a series of other limited wars routed out Pallavas from the region. This established the Chola Empire back in power after over 400 years. Vijayalaya's successors maintained the control and even expanded their empire in each generation. Following Vijayalaya were the two of the greatest rulers of Chola Empire, Rajaraja Chola and his son Rajendra Chola. Rajaraja, who is also described as Rajaraja the Great, expanded the Chola Empire to cover entire southern India, going up to what's called the Kalinga Empire, or today's Orissa and Bengal region. His foreign conquest led him to victory over northern Sri Lanka and Maldives. Rajaraja was not just a fierce warrior, but was also a great administrator. On the administration side, he replaced local strongmen and local princes by officials and strengthened local governments. He commissioned a land survey, leading to distribution of the empire into local blocks and governing units. These measures greatly benefited the citizens, which resulted in greater tax revenues, which in turn allowed him to continue expanding his territory. He built the iconic Brihadeshwara temple in Tanjore, dedicated to Lord Shiva. This temple stands to this day and is known for its unique architecture and symbolizes the power and might of the Chola Empire. All of this came on the back of huge military conquests. He won decisive battles against his neighboring powers, Pandyas and the Cholas, and he assumed the title of Mumudi Chola, the one who wears the three crowns. He also defeated the Central Indian Empire called the Chalukyas, and also the Kalinga Empire in the north. He used naval power to win northern Sri Lanka and Maldives. His usage of navy allowed control over Bay of Bengal and key ports in the region. This led to stability and development of trade routes with other kingdoms across Asia, something his successor, King Rajendra, benefited immensely from. While Rajaraja sowed the seeds for Chola's expansion, it was his son Rajendra Chola who reaped the benefit and further added to the domination. On the military front, he further consolidated the expanded kingdom. He consolidated and completed the conquest of Sri Lanka and also the Chalukyas. However, his biggest win leveraged the Chola navy, which had been honed into a true blue water power with over 1,000,000 men. Rajendra led Chola forces deep into Indian Ocean, winning decisive battle against the Sri Vijayans in today's Sumatra and Malay Peninsula. He invaded parts of what is today called Malaysia and Thailand. His rule ended the reign of Sri Vijayan Empire and took over control of ports of Kedah and Temasek. Temasek is the ancient name of what is today called as Singapore. However, despite all these military conquests, the one victory he was most proud of was his conquest in the northern part of India, especially the area around River Ganga. After defeating King Mahipala of Pala dynasty, the Cholas finally reached the banks of River Ganga. King Rajendra was so proud of this conquest, he constructed a new capital called Gangai Konda Cholapuram, the one who got water from River Ganga, and even constructed a temple similar to the iconic Brihadeshwara temple in memory of his great victory. The decline of Cholas started in 1200 CE with multiple succession battles and break in line of succession. Internal conflicts led to weakening of the army. In the final act, bitter traditional rivals, the Pandyas, sacked the Chola capital and the entire territory came under Pandya control, thus bringing to close the 1500-year-old empire. As we look back at this mighty empire, while Chola Empire today is known for its magnificent and iconic temples built in traditional Hindu architecture, Chola military was a reason for all the growth and grandeur they were able to build and requires special mention. One of the hallmarks of Chola military was the degree of discipline and autonomy that military commanders had in raising a professional force. Chola army had 2 million soldiers and over 60,000 war elephants at its disposal. The army was based on ancient Indic system of Chaturanga Bala, or fourfold power described in ancient Indian text of Arthashastra, which was based on efficient deployment of elephant, chariot or archers, infantry and cavalry units, being led by a capable commander. Chola army used this principle to arrange its army into regiments, with commanders having full ownership of individual units. The disciplined regiment, along with high degree of autonomy in training and recruitment, made this a strong force for its times. In addition to the fourfold power, Cholas also believed in adding diplomacy and intelligence network of spies to build into a sixfold power, which crushed its oppositions of its time. Chola Navy stands out in Indian history as one of the rare occasions where empire relied on naval power to expand and increase its reach beyond its traditional shores. At its peak, it was Asia's largest navy, with blue water capabilities and a personal strength of 1 million men. Navy was used in a big way by King Rajendra to focus on Southeast Asian military campaigns. One in particular was its usage against the Srivijayan Empire in today's Indonesia. The Srivijayans controlled the trade choke points of Straits of Malacca. Chola Navy launched incessant successive attacks and used fast-moving surprise attacks to score important victories over the Srivijayans, which led to opening of Chola trade in the region and also resulted in opening of trade relationships with the Chinese. Strong navy enabled the Cholas to achieve the military, political and cultural influence over a vast maritime empire stretching from the Maldives to the Philippines and the northern India, and trade links stretching from Rome to China. The Chola naval influence resulted in a lasting legacy of Indic cultural influence evidenced in Balinese Hinduism and charm culture. While the military allowed the empire to grow, Cholas left a lasting impact across its empire through its arts, literature, and imposing architecture. Chola kings constructed one stunning temple after the other. The most famous of them, Brihadeshwara Temple, another one, Airataveshwara Temple, and finally the Gangaikonda Cholapuram Temple. Today these temples are part of UNESCO World Heritage Site and are collectively called as the Great Living Chola Temples. Temples during Chola times were not just places of worship, but were also a place for trade, music, literature, and even banking, and also a place for community to get together. This explains the importance given to these buildings as an important means for political influence and a symbol of strength and might of the empire. Chola Empire also shows some of the best literary work coming out of this time. Prominent among them is 12th century poet called Kamban, who is most famously known for composing Ramavataram, the Tamil version of epic Ramayana. King Rajaraja Chola was himself involved in recovering ancient Shiva scripts and hymns and authorized scholars to compile it in 11th century. It led to creation of 12 volumes of Shiva hymns, which covered over 600 years of religious and philosophical teachings through these hymns. Despite all these contributions, Chola Empire has largely been forgotten. Many don't even know that India once had a strong naval force that was feared and respected at the same time. The temples remain the last symbol of their might. However, there is very little in terms of any memorial for them. The ill-maintained final resting place of Rajaraja shows how little is done to preserve the rich history that the future generations should know and be proud of.